great. Another quest, another day. We're here at Tottenham Cemetry, which I remember for many, many years for a multitude of reasons. In particular, one of the family line graves as well, which is so important to me, is for a multitude of reasons that I won't share online, as it were, on the camera. However, it's great here today. What we're going to be doing shortly is going down to what used to be known as All Saints Church. It's now All Hallows Church, which is at the far end, where there's lots and lots of reports of poltergeist activity over the years. So that's quite important. Children, workhouse children, running around the yard there, which is not surprising because here, like as over at Enfield as well, where we're going a bit later on, there's where the old workhouses were established. We're normally associated near to churches and obviously on diocese land. So that's quite important. But here in particular, the graveyard, it's got some very interesting things I'll talk much more at the church about. The 5.5 years of vampirism here in Tottenham Cemetery. The vampire were lurking around. There were so many stories that was pretty much kept hush-hush at the time, but it's certainly talked about in great detail. So we'll talk more about that when we get out to the church. So let's go up and have a look. Great, we're at All Hallows Church. Now sadly the church is not open, so God's not in today, clearly. A shame, but I guess that's probably because of the recent spate of thefts, but you do get a sense of feel about almost stepping back in time with the actual building itself. The building originally, this current building, was erected in 1148, which is quite interesting for that period of time. And we can certainly see, if you can just pan around to the stone structure there, the different styles that were used and how it's been modernised and extended over the years. It was actually given, not being sound like a Michael Caine really, it's not many people know this. It's not a lot of people know that. It's about the King David I of Scotland. This is what this is about. Now, if we go back to the Knights Templar quest for the Grail and how the alleged trail went right up to Roslin Chapel, across Scotland, and then came back down to England. Oddly enough, it ends up back here. Because isn't it strange that the King David I of Scotland actually owned this entire, what was an estate and land, and then thus gave it back to the people in 1148, which is quite interesting. Cyclists, it's the main footpath through to get from one end to the other. Interesting enough, this from Tottenham, just to give you a little bit of history, modern history, you can travel through this graveyard and get over to Broadwater Farm Estate. Now, some people that lived, as I did, through that, that was the major riots in Broadwater Farm Estate, that there was lots of damage, carnage, major fires. Most cars were set on fire. Mine wasn't, thankfully, but most cars were set on fire. So this is a main pathway through to get you to Broadwater Farm Estate, which is a bit of a scary, or used to be a scary place back when it happened. Now, the actual land was given to the church, as I say, in 1148. They built lots and lots of things on it, but what was interesting is, in 1858, they had to acquire 5 more acres of recreation ground of land, because obviously there was too many gravestones here, population's increasing. Where did they bury people? And obviously back in the 1800s, the 19th century in other words, people were much more into obviously burials. It's only in a modern time that we've got into this era of cremations, as it were, which by all means, if anyone does get cremated, I personally wouldn't bother putting gold-plated handles on your coffin and things like that. They're not going to burn in the furnace. They're probably going to be stripped off and recycled. So always worth a thought there for undertakers and things. Now it gets much better, because in 1978 in particular, and this went on for 5.5 years, from this part here going right down to White Hart Lane entrance, there was the stories of the vampire, the male vampire that lurked around the yard, the graveyard, the cemetery itself. And there was too many stories from people, too many tales of seeing this shadow figure that was far removed from being an apparition as such, very much looking as living flesh. As I say, that was from 1978 onwards that actually happened. It was pretty much calmed down during that period, and the residents of Tottenham didn't really do much about it. It was all kept fairly low key. But if we go back to the late 70s, it was a very different world to now in the year 2016. Further interesting here is the story of the workhouse. Now, ironically, there used to be a workhouse straight across those bushes there, over yonder, as they say, and that what is now, in today's world, a children's school. So isn't it ironic that a workhouse turns into a school? So it's still sort of like a prison in that sense, I guess, of the term. However, the workhouse, there was obviously back in the Victorian period, there were many deaths, as we know, lots of unwanted children that died from disease. We didn't have the antibiotic revolution that we have today that's about to fade out. So we've had that antibiotic revolution for this short period of time in Earth's history, which has been helpful, but obviously they didn't have the antibiotic phase then. They died. They had colds and flus, they died, unless their bodies were strong enough to survive it. And so there's stories again of children in Victorian clothing walking round and round this area, playing. People that walk through this yard at dusk say they can hear children playing. Now obviously the school's closed at that point in time. I certainly get the feeling that you're being watched. I mean, certainly going down to where we were before at the family grave and coming up here, you do get a sense of peace, but a sense of warning at the same time, which is quite interesting. So there's those things. Sadly also we can't get into the church today. Probably be a visit for another day, but there's certainly things here that are buried and not mentioned. And let's at least us forget one of the other places we're going to shortly, which will be Enfield, and we cannot forget Green Street in Enfield. Bearing in mind at the same time that the vampire stories arose in 1978 here in Tottenham, just down the road in Enfield we had the full stories of Green Street and the poltergeist activities. That's quite interesting. So we're going to go on to that shortly. Names associated with here, we're looking at Clark, Fordham, Sapsford, the Irish contingent, and Payne, oddly enough. But we're also looking at one that I haven't mentioned to date, which is quite interesting, which is May. There's a reason I haven't mentioned that up until today, but there's also May, M-A-Y. Very short lineage into the quest, but the surname May.